All right, if you would please take your Bibles and turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, we're going to be looking at verses 7 through, actually it's 11. I know it says 12 behind me, but it is just 11. But 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 7 through 11. You know, when I was a kid, I think I've told you or expressed this to you a few times, but I was chubby, just like a lot chubby. And I remember being in kindergarten, and I enjoyed my time there. I did it twice. And I did, but I enjoyed my time there. But the one where I did it, you know, and we had our own little playground there, and we were hanging out. I remember it was a really nice playground. It was just for us, and a lot of shade trees going up there. And I've got a lot of good memories of being there, and some not so good memories. I remember falling off the monkey bars and just doing that face plant in the dirt. You know, that taste. I still can think of that. I remember one of my friends got new shoes. They were Woody Woodpecker shoes, and like we were all discussing, like, how much faster are you now wearing those as before? You know, that conversation. I remember eating there's a big honeysuckle bush in the corner. We have honeysuckles here, right? That's a thing? Yeah, okay. Just making sure we're on the same page. But I remember it was just there, just to the side of the playground. We were all over there. We'd eat the honeysuckles and get yelled at. You know, you don't want to just eat, little kids eating stuff randomly and out of the woods. But I remember eating that. And then I remember this time it was probably either just before school started or right after school day, and being on the playground, enjoying our time there, and seesawing with my mom over on the side there where that teeter-totter was. And, you know, that doesn't seem like all that interesting to you probably at some point. But you have to understand, my mom was the only person I could seesaw with. So, yeah, it's not that sad. It's really not. I think it's funny. And I'm not trying to get sympathy, but, you know, like, because I remember doing that and having fun with that. And then, you know, going to school and being with my friends, and I'm sitting on it, and it's just, boom, it's down, and they're grasping with everything they can as, you know, little 5-year-olds, trying to grab the end of it and pull it down, and they can't. And it's not just one, it's multiples of them trying to hang on there. And I don't know why I remember this, but I specifically remember them. They're grabbing and they're reaching out, trying to pull it down, like, what do you eat? And I don't know where this came from. But I said, salad. Which was true. Just in junction with a lot of other things as well, but it was like they couldn't pull me down no matter how hard they tried. But they didn't have that problem with my mom. My mom and I, we balanced each other out. I could do that, which tells you how big I was, that I balanced a female adult out on the playground. But that's the way that it really worked. It's probably one of my favorite memories because it's just so comical. And it's a great way, honestly, to understand this passage, that authority requires balance in order to work. Things only work well when they're in balance, and when they're not, things get kind of complicated and strained in some aspects, and people get left hanging on for dear life, trying to be a part of it, or trying to hang on, or trying not to be left behind, or trying not to be even abused by the system, so to speak, because it's out of balance. And we know when things are out of balance, they just don't work, like the seesaw. And the reality is when authority figures get into that, and they do that, it can be crushing really and broken for both sides. It's not good for the authority. It's not good for those that are trying to be under that authority or with that authority. But what can be done about it? Well, it needs to be brought back into balance, which is easier said than done sometimes. But things need to shift. Things need to change. Diets need to be had, you know. But until people that are involved with that recognize that fact and do something about it, well, nothing's going to change. Paul is addressing some people in this passage that are also, for all intents and purposes, throwing their weight around. Not necessarily like physically, but in their authority, they're throwing their weight around. They have a level of authority in this church, and they're exercising it in a way that is borderline abusive in some aspects. They're leading the people away from where they're supposed to be going, and they're kind of militarizing, weaponizing the group, the church there in some capacity, specifically against Paul, but really anti-gospel in the long part of it. And they're doing so for their own sake, for their own power's sake, for their own authority's sake. It's very self-interested, self-oriented in that regard. And what happens then is the church, whether they realize it or not, they're left hanging on the end, and they can't figure out why this isn't fun. But that's where they ultimately are. And authority really is, in a church, really in any context, is supposed to kind of lift people up. It's supposed to balance out so that it's mutually beneficial for everybody. And the authority that's here that Paul's specifically writing to or really against, they're not doing that. They're looking at this and they're thinking that this church and this authority structure, it's all there for their benefit, for them to get ahead, for them to look good, and it's ultimately killing the church. And the problem is that this scenario has played out across the centuries and really millennia countless times, where the authority in those churches like this, it's out of balance. And it's really hard. You start to realize how hard it really is to bring that back into balance without it finally something just breaking in the middle. Authority imbalance happens when those who have it use it to help those who don't be the best version of themselves to the glory of God. I know that sounds kind of woke. I promise we're not going there, but I didn't know how else to write it. But it is one of those things that authority imbalance happens when those who have it use it to help those be the best version of themselves. It's supposed to be mutually beneficial in the church. Everybody's supposed to benefit. Everybody's supposed to win. Now, it's going to look maybe a little bit different depending on the person and situation, but to be the best version of yourself, which means that you are the best Christian you could possibly be. That's what good authority is supposed to do. It's supposed to buoy everybody up, help other people up. In this case, it's not happening, and unfortunately, that's very common even in this country today. So let's do some reading. Verses 7 through 8 is where we're going to start in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and then we'll make some comments based on that. Look at what is before you, before your eyes. If anyone is confident that he is Christ's, let him remind himself that just as he is Christ, so also are we. For even if I boast a little too much of our authority, which the Lord gave for building you up and not for destroying you, I will not be ashamed. Really what he's saying is consider this. Consider this. What are we to consider? This. The church exists for your benefit. I probably should say like our benefit rather than your, but it's everyone's benefit. And you can actually take Paul's cold opening here. You look at verse 7 again. Look at what is before your eyes. And you have to figure out exactly what Paul means by that, because it can be taken in the languages. It could actually be a question. Are you looking at what's before your eyes? It could be as a statement, look at what's before your eyes. Or it could be a command, look at what is before your eyes. You can kind of take it any of those three ways. And most argue that it's actually supposed to be a command. Look at it. Look at what is in front of you, because you're not seeing something. And then, I don't know if you've ever been in that where you're looking for something and you're like, it's staring you in the face, and sometimes you know this. That's the worst part. You know you're looking at a table, you're looking at something and you're like, I know I'm looking at this and I cannot for the life of me see it. My wife is always like, that happens to you because you're a guy? It might be the case, right? Ladies come in and like, it's right there, dummy. I can't see it. I can't see it. And this is one of those situations where for these guys and their teachers, and maybe because they're guys too, they're not seeing it either. They're staring at something, they're involved with something, and they really don't see what's plainly in front of their face. And the question becomes, what does he want them to look at? What can't they see? And it's really something as simple as the church. The church itself, they don't see the church. The church is standing in front of them. The church really that they're standing in, they don't see it. And I know some of you might take issue with some of these things, but the reality is that the church exists, you say for our benefit, for your benefit, and it's like, well, doesn't it exist for God's glory? Yes. Yes, but in this context, in this moment, we're not even having that conversation yet. We're having the conversation that they're convinced that it's for their benefit, their own personal, these teachers' benefit. He's like, no, it's so much bigger than it, so much broader than that. So that's his focus, which ultimately, when we get that right, then God, of course, is glorified. But this is true, and this is where, again, talking about these super apostles, these false teachers that we mentioned way back in the beginning of the book. They've kind of disappeared for a while. We're coming back up. In fact, we're going to spend a lot more time to the end of the book really talking about some of them and their decisions and their directions and their way of thinking, because it becomes really important here. But it's not really that they can't see the building as a church, or even the people that is the church proper. They of course can see those things. What they fail to appreciate is the significance of those, and the significance of its existence, right? And that's what they're missing. They're missing that, and that the fact that this thing even exists here in court, which is a miracle in and of itself. And so I think about this, and these are the ones that so influenced the church at Corinth there to begin with, that Paul had to write that severe letter. Remember that one? We don't have it, but we know that. I mean, Paul just came in and just like really just was harsh with them and strong with them. and they seem to be reacting against that. But in light of these guys, and it's brought the church back really from the brink in many ways, but now they're still there. Some of these people are still there, and even though most have turned back to Paul, there's still this contingent that's there that's wrestling with this, but they're still making comments about Paul and trying to win people back, and they're claiming Paul can't be of Christ. He can't be used of Christ. He's not flashy like they are. He can't talk like they can. I mean, you look at him, and he's not that great looking, and they're making comments like, he's bold in his letters, but then when he comes to talk to you in person, he's not that great. He's not that great of a communicator at all. And they're saying all these things, and he's like literally, they're standing in the foyer of the church that was founded by the preaching of Paul himself. And he's like, you guys, look at it. Look at where you're standing. You're making these complaints about me in the church that was literally founded by my example, by my preaching in the town, in the city of Corinth. Remember, we talked about that. It was like the Las Vegas of its day. It is this terrible, depraved place that was like painfully obvious to anybody that walked in. Like, this is a bad place. This is a hard place to do ministry. And then here's this church, and there seems to be sizable. They're doing all these kinds of things, and they're complaining about Paul. And Paul's like, I walked into Las Vegas and planted a church in the middle of the town, and it's thriving. And you're telling me God's not using me? Come on, guys. It's a ridiculous comment. Now, who are these guys, or what are these guys? And I kind of tried to figure out, like, are they honestly believers? Are they maybe misguided believers, these super apostles or whatnot? And I don't know. I really don't know. I wish we could be more specific on some of the ins and outs of who they are. And it's probably like a lot of groups where you can take a group and you're like, but if you take individuals out of that group and single them out, you can be like, okay, some of these, maybe they were followers of Christ in some capacity. There's just bad teaching, bad examples, and others aren't. Maybe, it's hard to imagine wholesale they're all bad, but maybe, it's hard to say. But at the end of the day, they're missing the entire point. Right? The church is there for everyone's benefit, and it's benefited everyone by its existence in this place and Paul's hard work of the gospel. But we move from there to this idea here, too, that our authority, Paul and everyone else's in the church, their authority exists for also their benefit, everyone's benefit. Paul has every reason to be there and write to the Corinthian church and write authoritatively. And you can just tell by what he writes here that he has and exercises a purpose behind it, because he wants to see and make the church better. He wants the church to be better. And by that we mean not the building, but the people. He wants to lift them up. And I can only imagine the strides and the leaps and bounds, for as problematic as the church of Corinth is, and we see that especially in 1 Corinthians, but think about how far they've come. Think about how far they've come, and the atmosphere in which this church exists, the sin and the depravity that's on display in full view everywhere. And these are all first-generation Christians. It'd be surprising if this church is even 5 years old. And here they are. Look how far they've come. Don't worry about how far they've got to go. Look at how far they've come, how much they've changed by the gospel that Paul preached them. Look how far they've come. It's truly amazing, but they're all first-generation Christians. And he's like, the church is making a difference in their lives and authority, him as an individual, and really the Word of God is making that difference. But I think it surprises us sometimes to think about authority is supposed to make a difference in our lives. It's supposed to benefit you, but it should be. It's there to help you be the best version of yourself that you can be in Christ. And we can kind of actually see this in Jesus himself, because Jesus himself recognized for himself the authority of the Old Testament. Jesus even said, Matthew 5:17, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." He kept the law. He looked at the Old Testament. He kept that law. He was doing that. And following that, he recognized that for what it is. Now, there's been a bit of a controversy, and I hinted at this in Sunday school, but there's been a bit of a controversy online this past week where I've been watching that Exodus thing on the Daily Wire, and there's this clip that's gone around, and you could probably find this on YouTube pretty easy if you want to, but one of the individuals that are part of this group is Dennis Prager, and he's there, and he's kind of like the resident Jew on the panel, which is fascinating to get his insight into the Old Testament and the Pentateuch and the Jewish mindset that we're not familiar with. We're so used to looking at the Old Testament with a Christian perspective, we just miss stuff just because we do. And so he comes into this, and he starts, and I'm assuming they got to the law, the actual giving of the law in Exodus 20. But he made some of these comments that, and defended actually pornography and even lust in a context. And everybody, you could tell that it's kind of a round table format, and it got like just uncomfortable. And like greatly so. But he's like, but how? And this is not an exact quote, but it's very, very close. And he says, he's less interested in the interior person morally than you are, meaning Christians, than you are. I come from a behaviorist, law-based religion, and we care how you act. And then he goes on to defend lust specifically, and then also pornography, because it comes up in the conversation. Like, what do you do with these things? And as I said, everybody is kind of like, I'm uncomfortable. But it's an interesting thing. And I don't think that's necessarily derogatory of Dennis Prager himself. I think that's interesting and an insight into the Jewish mindset. Because he's exactly right. Because the law is all about how you act, how you conform, what is seen on the outside. Don't do these kinds of things. And so he's like, hey, you can look at pornography. Just don't commit adultery with a woman. You can lust after a woman. Just don't do anything with her, like physically do anything with her. But what's going on in your mind or maybe your heart doesn't matter. You can do that because you can't really tell on the outside. So he's kind of defending some of these things. And as I said, it got a little bit tense in there, but I think he's giving us an insight and wisdom into not necessarily just him himself as an individual, but that Jewish mindset that's been a problem for a long time. So keeping that in the back of your head, look at this verse now in Matthew 5:28, when Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount. Look what he says. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Why does Jesus say that? It really doesn't make any sense unless you look and take what Dennis Prager was saying about how he viewed the law and understood the law, and then it's like, oh, I get it. That actually makes a lot of sense. Because Jesus, as he's looking and recognizing the authority of the Old Testament in his life, he's slotting himself underneath that, but he's also saying at the same time, I'm not just keeping the letter of the law, I'm keeping the spirit of the law. The changing of the heart attitude. And he's slotting himself underneath that. And he keeps that law, and it really demonstrates that he really is the real deal. The law can't condemn him. It condemned all of us. It can't condemn him because he's keeping not even just the letter of the law, he's keeping the spirit of the law, which none of us is ever able to do. And it is for our good. In doing that, it really helps us be the best version of ourselves we could possibly be. Matthew 15, verses 19 through 20. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone. What comes from the heart? That's what defiles a person. It always starts there. And what benefits society then is when you're the best version of yourself, you're reigning in your heart, God is working on your heart and keeping you from those things, then suddenly you see people not as objects to be desired, but as actually having value. It reduces crime because people aren't trying to indulge and engage these kinds of things, and eventually that's going to spill over because what defiles a person is out of the heart, and what that eventually comes out, it manifests itself in some capacity, and then you see that going down that way. And we see the destructive nature of pornography specifically, and lust and adultery and all that kind of stuff. It all comes through that way because what's going on in the heart finally starts spilling out into real life. And it happened all the time. You have that going on. You have these ideas here of people not becoming enslaved to their passions. See, we become the best version of ourselves, but we're submitted to that authority. And then pastors and authority figures within the church are those under-shepherds that God has put in there, that we also are under the authority of God's word, and then we try to pass it on to you, and we have these discussions, these mutual discussions, and this movement forward to do this, to be the best version of ourselves, all of us. But it's not so that a pastor or a leader can just feel powerful or throw his weight around. So this church revolves around me. It doesn't. It's under the authority of God's word. Jesus himself, who wrote the Old Testament, because he's God, he comes here and he himself puts himself underneath the authority of the Old Testament. He follows that, right? That's his act of obedience. That's his act of righteousness that we need to put on our account because we don't have any. We can't do it on our own. He did it for us. That's his active obedience. He does that, but it's because he put himself under the authority of that law. It helps us understand that. Human authority, though, of course, has its limits. Right? You've placed yourself under the authority, so to speak, of Pastor Dan and myself. As your pastors, we answer to God for you. We will. We do. But it has its limits as well. It's kind of like politicians. You can vote us in, and you can vote us out. We're not an absolute. And we shouldn't be. We should be able to be voted out. We should be able to kind of have to be held accountable ourselves by you to the Word of God. That is something. It's a check and balance a little bit. It reminds us really in leadership positions, like, guess what? You're not the end all of all things. We have limits. We do have limits, and all that can backfire from time to time, too, because as we remember, back in chapter 1, we mentioned Jonathan Edwards, 2 Corinthians 1:14 was his farewell sermon to his church because they were voting him out, because they didn't like the way that he was orchestrating the communion table. He was like, no, this should be limited to believing individuals in the church, and the church was like, nah, we disagree with you. And they threw him out by like a 90% margin. And he looks at 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and says, okay, look, I'm going to go. And he's very tender towards them in a lot of ways, but he's just reminded them, we will meet again. You're not really getting rid of me at the end of the day. But for us to look at this and understand that pastor, Jonathan Edwards there for his church, he really did mean what he was doing for the benefit of his church and his people. They didn't like it. They threw him out. But any modern pastor should be doing the same thing. He should be doing things with the congregation, with all of you, for your benefit, not mine. Jesus has all authority. He has all authority. And so often, what do we see him doing with it? Serving people. He's wandering the countryside. What's he doing? He's doing like Red Cross stuff. He's doing like Samaritan's Purse stuff, like humanitarian aid. He's talking and walking with lepers, people that nobody else wanted anything to do with, and he's healing them. He's coming to individuals that are the sick and the dying and the poor and the broken, and he's coming and he's spending time with them, not so much in the city centers, though he did go there, but with the down and out. And he's God. He's God. He has all authority. All power has been given to him, and he's hanging out with like the lowest classes of society that existed. See, it never went to his head. And he's there ministering for the benefit of the common person. He was getting his hands dirty. Kind of literally, too. You remember later in John chapter 13 when they're having that time of the Last Supper there with the disciples, and there was nobody there to wash anybody's feet, and then Jesus all of a sudden, he gets up from the table and he's trying to give an illustration, but he dons a towel, gets down on his knees and starts washing the disciples' feet. That was like the most humiliating job you could almost have in the first century. And all the disciples knew that their feet were dirty. Nobody had washed them. There was nobody there to wash them. And you notice, none of them were volunteering for that job. It was beneath them. And then Peter finally kind of says out loud what everybody else is thinking, like, Jesus, what are you doing? I don't get this. And Jesus says, you want to be great in the kingdom of God, then you'd better serve. It was a humility thing. But Jesus donned a towel to do it. And he got down and he got his hands dirty. And some of you might be thinking, like, I don't like towels, I don't like water, I really don't like feet. I mean, I hear you. But then you also don't like being, you want to be then least in the kingdom. That's really what it boils down to. Like, if you want to be something, it's part of the upside down kingdom of God where the way up is the way down. Right? It's like everything's backwards in the kingdom of God, and where those that are humble will be elevated, and those who are elevated will be knocked down a peg or two, because that's how it works in the kingdom of God. But he says, you want to be great in the kingdom of God, then you had better get off your high horse, get down on your knees, and start washing some feet. Because that's what leaders in my kingdom do. And really we see Jesus here ministering to us. Jesus was really honestly wearing a towel, washing feet the entire existence he was here on earth. That's humiliating. It wasn't just John 13 in that upper room. It was the entire time on there. He was doing what none of us would be willing to do. We wouldn't leave the palaces on high, and the wealth on high, and the fellowship with God that he had one-on-one. None of us would do that. He did. Because he's a servant leader. And Paul's goal in all of this is, he says, not to use that power, the power that God has given him, to destroy them. He says, I want to make you better. I want to wash your feet. I want to show you what real leadership looks like. It's for your benefit. This authority that God has given me, it's for your benefit. I want to make you and help you become the best version of yourself. Be the best Christian that you could possibly be. That is my goal. He wants to restore the balance of power. Bringing this aspect here to a conclusion, we consider the existence of the church and the authority, and you think about that and remember that it is for your benefit. Not to give me or any other person with a position of leadership some kind of a power trip or something like that. But there are also a few things to consider in this as well. The appearances that sometimes people put on really are only skin deep. And so consider this also. Consider this also. Verse 9, I do not want to appear to be frightening you with my letters. For they say his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech of no account. Let such a person understand that what we say by letter and when absent, we do when present. Appearances really are only skin deep. I don't want to scare you with my letters, he says. It's kind of a strange way to put that is, but I think it's really the accusation that these super apostles, these teachers were making against Paul. You're all big and bold and bad in your letters, and then you come in person and you're like, not that great. Not that great. Not a good communicator. This reminded me, like as soon as I read this almost, it reminded me of the scene in The Wizard of Oz. Are you already with me? Like there's Dorothy, Toto, and what is the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, right? And they're doing their thing, and they're going there, and they finally they follow the Yellow Brick Road, they get to the Emerald City, they go and find Oz, and they see him, and there's the mighty, all-powerful Oz, and you're seeing that. And it was one of my favorite, they used to put that on TV like once a year when I was a kid. It was like my favorite. We would get so excited for that, and like, yeah, this is awesome. You see it, and there's all-powerful Oz, and like, you think about the graphics for that time, like, they're amazing. Like, there was not a computer anywhere, and they've got these amazing special effects, probably literally smoke and mirrors as they're doing this, but there's this big, floating head above everything, and smoke and fire, and he's scaring, it's loud, and they're freaking out, and they go, and I think they kill the witch, they bring the thing back, and and they find out he's not actually going to help them. Maybe he can't actually help them. And it's like, all is lost. And then you see Toto in the corner, like grabbing that shower curtain thing on the side and starting to peel it back. He's like, hey, don't pay any attention to that man behind the curtain. He's doing his thing, and all of a sudden it rips it back. And I'm like, wait, that's you. And he went from this big, all-powerful, mighty Oz to this bumbling, stumbling fool behind the curtain. And they're like, you're just like us. You're nothing special. And these guys are saying, hey, Paul's the man behind the curtain. He's all big, wild, and powerful, up front with everybody, but you, in his letters, but you actually pull back the letter, if you will, and that's what you get. He's a fool. He's nothing. He's no big deal. And that's at least what they're accusing him of. And that clues us in a little bit about who some of these guys might actually be that are making these accusations. We don't necessarily have a group, or a person, I should say, but we do maybe have a group, somebody called the sophists, these individuals that actually, they made a living on just talking. They were professional speakers, and they wanted to make sure that they looked the part. They had the finest clothes, they just screamed wealthy, they were prim and polished and shiny, and they were good communicators. And that helped Daniel and I understand some of these things, because we discuss this passage nearly every week, what we're going to talk about and work through some things, and it's really beneficial. But one of the things that kept coming up for us is how can Paul be such a bad communicator? I mean, they keep making these statements like Paul can't put two words together, and I understand that sometimes people can write better than they can speak. I mean, I get that, but I'm like, This is the Apostle Paul. I mean, we have his letters, of course. He can certainly put thoughts together, but we have his recorded speeches. I mean, there's Acts 17 and Mars Hill. He's convincing these philosophers and all these individuals, like, there is a God, and let me declare him to you. And he's convincing a large portion of them to tune in a little bit more. Like, he feels like he's really got his act together. How can they make these comments about him like being so bad? And I think what this helped us understand a little bit, it's not that Paul was that bad, it's that they were honestly that good. This is all they did. They were public speakers. They would influence and try to direct people towards certain directions and options. And it was not so much about what they said, but how they said it. That's what mattered to them more than anything else. And unfortunately, we still have people that fit that category. Tim Challies, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. He's kind of a blogger. But a few years ago, he was on doing some reviews for a seminary that hired him to kind of like do some various sermons, and some on the positive side, some on the negative side. And so the negative sermon, he went online and he found Joel Osteen's most popular sermon, right? And if I get the name right, it's The Power of I Am. Either they took it down or they changed the name. I can't quite find this sermon. But anyway, it was, at the time it was the most popular one. I don't think it's true anymore, but Oprah Winfrey actually came out and said, man, this sermon changed my life. I've changed some things based on this sermon. And if you're thinking the power of I am has anything to do with God, as in the I am, like Moses in the burning bush, I am who I am, like the power. I mean, it's a brilliant title, that's what he meant by it, but it's not. You actually get into there and you realize like God is kind of absent in a lot of this. No, what he meant is literally when you say I am, it means something. You believe something, you speak something, you create something. That's what he means. And he goes on to the sermon and he starts speaking about these kinds of things, and he's trying to be comical a little bit, but he says, when you're going through life and you say, man, I am feeling old today, wrinkles come flying your way. He goes, man, I'm feeling fat today. He goes, really, calories come flying your way. But when you say, man, I am young and I am attractive, like, man, the Lord will refresh and renew your youth, and everybody's like, you can tell they're panning the camera because he's serious. He really means this. It's the power of I am. When you say I am, whatever follows it happens. And you can tell, they're panning the audience a little bit and kind of the cameras and stuff like that. And you're seeing people are kind of laughing. And he intends some of this to be a little bit comical, I think. But he's doing that. But people are like, oh, yeah. And you're like, why are you agreeing with this? It's really just the power of positive thinking wrapped in with half or maybe a quarter of a Bible verse, and it's totally ripped out of context, and then selling it. And he's up there, and I think it must be working for him, because he's like, I am young and attractive, doing all that. I'm like, he's like 60. He hasn't changed a day. You look at any sermon, his hair is like, I don't know, maybe it's a wig, I don't know, but it's like, he hasn't changed a day, it feels like. And you look at it, he's telling you this kind of stuff, and you're like, oh my goodness, but he really does believe this. And it's and he says, he's trying to communicate all these kinds of things, and people believe it. Of course, I think out of the sermon specifically, there came like books and all kinds of other things like that, but people are believing it. And it's an auditorium full of like tens of thousands of people. Now you're in agreement. I am, and you can fill in the blank. And you get somebody that looks like that, all prim and polished and looking good, and he can convince you of almost anything, especially when you want to believe it, because it sounds good. Man, if I could just say I am wealthy, yeah, money comes falling your way. The problem is when you get into real life, and you got someone that's struggling with cancer, or you got someone struggling with like just full-on addiction, or you've got someone else that's struggling with like the loss of a child or a spouse or a broken home or a broken relationship, like all these kind of things, and you're like, okay, I am what? What's going to fix that? See, it's empty. It starts to crack underneath its own weight because it doesn't really fit anymore, because the power of positive thinking doesn't cure your cancer. The power of positive thinking is not going to bring your job back. See, it's vacuous, but it sounds good on paper, and people will buy that book, and they'll be convinced, and they'll be duped for a period of time. Like, this is really going to be good for me and helpful for me. But when the rubber meets the road, and all of a sudden that I am whatever, It doesn't fit. I'd love to see what people, like if he actually interacted with people, like, look, I bought your book, I read your sermons and your messages on all this, I said I am healthy, and you know what? I don't feel any better. What's he say? Partly in my head, I can hear him say, I am just leaving. Maybe he would say that. But it's empty. There's no content. Paul is concerned about what he says. These guys are only concerned in how they say it. And it's just so easy to pick on Joel. Well, it is, but honestly, he's not by himself. He's not unique in this. We could throw up all kinds of names from all kinds of churches, probably from all over the world, that fit the same. They're doing the same exact thing. He's just kind of the pinnacle of the prosperity gospel kind of a preachers, but there's plenty of people that are doing the exact same kind of things. And they would fit right in with this group where they look really good, and they can spin it, they can convince you to buy this or to follow suit on what they're doing. But when you open it up and dissect what they're actually saying, there's nothing there. Appearances are only ever skin deep. They look good, but they're not. And at the end of the day, consider this also, appearances never fool God. You would expect Paul to be challenging some of the remarks as we're reading through, this passage, but he never really does. He never really does. He doesn't do that. Instead, he says that his words from a distance match his actions when he's present. He's consistent. Through and through, Paul is consistent. And any appearances that they put on, God sees right through them. He actually sees through all of us. And it doesn't matter what kind of clothes you put on or what kind of airs you put on or any kind of stuff. He sees right through it. See, they're worried about authority. Paul's worried about authenticity. Through and through, I'm the same. And God is never fooled by someone that just puts on a fancy suit and a tie. We've been going through 1 Samuel for a while now on Wednesday nights, and we just kind of finished up chapter 16, but this kind of fits in perfectly for what's been going on there. One of those chapters that they're about to anoint David as king. So Samuel goes to meet with the sons of Jesse, and he doesn't know who he's actually going to anoint there, but he goes there and he sees the eldest brother, Eliab, there, and Samuel walks up to him and says, surely this is the one that God would have me to anoint, to have him be king, because he looks the part, he looks like he should be a king, and he's ready to anoint him, and God stops him and says, look, 1 Samuel 16:7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance, or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him, for the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. I don't think Eliab was probably necessarily like a bad guy. Honestly, when he first shows up there, he has no idea why why Samuel's even there. He has no idea why he's showing up, why he's doing this kind of. He's just kind of there, and he's standing before him. I don't think he's trying to hide anything. But what we find is clearly going on is that God already sees and knows what's going on in his heart. God is looking for David, not an Eliab. And when it comes to us, God sees all of us too. He sees who we really are. Not who we want to be seen as, not who we want to pretend to be, not who we are when all the fancy clothes or the cars or whatever else we got going on. He sees us for who we really are. And when you realize, prior to Christ, it's not good, he sees all the hidden things inside that we try to hide. The clothes might make the man, but they don't hide him. He sees right through to our core and knows who are his. And that's why Jesus came and died. He came and died because he knew who we really are, and yet he comes and dies for us anyway, because what's on the inside is nothing but depravity. What's on the inside is lust. What's on the inside is pornography. What's on the inside is anger. What's on the inside is just sinfulness and wickedness through and through. That's who we are on the inside. And no matter what we look like on the outside, God sees it all. And yet Christ willingly came to die for us in our fallen state so we could be changed. God sees you at your worst. See, we all want to be loved, but we're really afraid to really be known. I can only imagine what would come up if for all of us, myself included, if we could broadcast above our heads like these little speech balloons or whatever. What are we thinking about right this moment? We couldn't find a pin fast enough to pop that balloon. We don't want to be known. Because we know the second you know me, you really know me, you would never love me. And yet with God, it's exactly the opposite. He really does know us and then loves us anyway, and then sends his Son to clean this up that we might be acceptable to him. And so that's you this morning, maybe outside of Christ. Understand that he came and died to make you who you ought to be the best version of yourself, but it requires an acceptance on your part of what he has done for you, because you cannot earn any of this. To be willing to place yourself under that authority of the Word of God, under God. Say, I don't want to be this anymore. I need to be saved. And the Bible simply just says, call on the name of the Lord and thou can be saved. Thou will be saved. And if you're already in Christ, then I think the aspect that's going on here is really to respect the authority of the Bible and its ministers. Not that its ministers are going to be perfect, because we're not. But we are here to try to help you at least be the best version, be the best Christian that you possibly can be. I will fail you for sure. I will fail you. There is no two ways about it. I will fail you for sure. But that's where the church comes for all of our benefit. You for me, I for you. That's the way it's supposed to work. That we hold each other accountable to be the best version of ourselves. And hopefully for both of us, and we come, like Paul had said later in this letter, I want to be proud of you and I want you to be proud of me. I want that mutual aspect of things. The body's supposed to build itself together like that. And we should. But if you're outside of Christ, you have to understand that no matter how hard you try to build yourself up, to make yourself better than what you are, you're simply trying to hide what's already on the inside. It's not going to work. You might fool us, you'll never fool God. And he's the only one that actually matters. But this is how we bring the authority structure back into balance. The authority is not too heavy. But at the same time, it comes alongside and helps you and raises you up to be the best version of yourself. That's what Paul wants. That's what we should want to. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this day. And I thank you for the struggles and the drama that Paul was going through in Corinth, because it's instructive to all of us to look at. Lord, when it comes to us as a church, I do pray that you be with Pastor Daniel and myself as human, at least, under shepherds of the gospel. That we not take ourselves too seriously. That we not try to throw our weight around and think that in some capacity this church represents somehow our beast of burden by which we can kind of just throw and heap all kinds of things on it, Lord, to make it all about us. It's your church. It's for your glory, not ours. And the Word of God is the ultimate authority by which all of us are under. May we never forget that. But Lord, also for the people, did they recognize the authority of your word? Did they recognize even our authority, but ultimately your authority? That it is working together to be the best version of themselves. Because you really do mean that. You really want them to be the best version of yourself, and it should be designed to do that, Lord. To challenge sometimes our thinking, our status quo, and realize that sometimes we're just wrong. Things need to change. And then, Lord, for those who maybe are outside of Christ, they've never really wanted to be under any authority. Or maybe they're just trying to pretend as if they are. But deep inside they know they've never really submitted to that. They don't want you to be Lord. over their lives. Lord, I pray you would grip their hearts, that they would see the blessings and the benefits that you have really orchestrated and put together, Lord, that it is there, that it's truly here. The church and your word and your Son coming was all for their benefit as well. They might truly have a relationship with you, grow in you. So, Lord, I pray you'd open their eyes if that happens to be them, that they might know you as you desire to be known. Lord, that we might be a whole church, a wholesome church, and a holy church. I pray for your blessing on all these things in Christ's name. Amen.